Welcome to The Explainer. You know, when you look at our planet, it is just teeming with life. From the tiniest bacteria to the biggest blue whales, there are millions and millions of species. So how in the world do we make sense of it all? How do we bring some order to the incredible, beautiful chaos of life?
Let's dive right in with a question you can probably relate to. Imagine your bookshelf, or maybe your entire room, is just a total mess. How do you even start to clean it up? Well, you'd probably group things, right? All the socks go in one drawer, all the books go on a shelf. Biologists face the exact same problem, just on a planetary scale. Because without some kind of system, trying to study any single organism would be like trying to find one specific book in a giant library with no sections, no categories, no alphabetical order. It would be complete and utter chaos. So, biological classification is basically the Dewey Decimal System for every living thing on Earth. It's how scientists create the order they need to do their work.
But this system, this library of life, it didn't just appear overnight. Oh no, it evolved. And our story really begins with a very, very simple first draft.
So way back in the 1700s, the famous botanist Carolus Linnaeus looked at the world and saw two pretty obvious groups. First, you had things that were stuck in the ground and seemed to make their own food. He called them plantae, or plants. Then you had things that moved around and ate other things. He called those animalia, or animals. Simple, right? It was elegant, and for a good while, it seemed to work just fine. But the more we discovered about the world, especially with the invention of the microscope, the more this simple system started to crack. I mean, what about fungi, like mushrooms? They don't move, but they don't make their own food either, so where do they go? And then you've got all this microscopic life, like bacteria. Or even weirder, tiny organisms that could photosynthesize like a plant and move around like an animal. The two-kingdom system was just too simple. It couldn't handle the true, messy diversity of life. And this is where our protagonist enters the story. In 1969, an American ecologist named R.H. Whitaker looked at all these exceptions, all these misfits, and proposed a revolutionary new system. He expanded the library of life from just two kingdoms to 5. Whitaker's real genius was in the criteria he used. He asked more fundamental questions. First, what kind of cell are we talking about? Is it a simple prokaryote with no nucleus or a complex eukaryote, which has one? Then he looked at how the organism was built. Is it just one cell or many? And finally, how does it get its energy? By using these basic principles, he created this beautiful, much more accurate map for the library of life. So let's use that map, shall we? Let's take a tour of these 5 kingdoms, starting with the oldest and simplest forms of life on the entire planet, Kingdom Monera. Now, the only members of this kingdom are the bacteria. As the oldest life forms on Earth, they are true pioneers. The entire kingdom is prokaryotic, meaning their cells have no nucleus. And they're split into 2 really interesting groups. You have the eubacteria, or true bacteria, which are literally all around us. Some helpful, some not so much. And then you have the archaeobacteria. These guys are the extremists, the survivors. Their unique cell structure lets them live in insane places, like boiling hot springs and ridiculously salty lakes, where nothing else could survive.
All right, let's move on to our next kingdom, and this is where things get really weird. Welcome to Kingdom Protista, which I like to call the miscellaneous drawer of life.
There's this quote from a famous biology text that says the boundaries of this kingdom are, quote, not well defined. And that's really just a polite scientific way of saying the Protista is the catch-all kingdom. It's basically where we put any single-celled organism with a nucleus that doesn't quite fit into the plant, animal, or fungus box. And that's what makes it so cool. You've got things like diatoms, which act like tiny plants, but then you have something like Euglena, which has chloroplasts to make its own food, but it also has a little tail to swim around and hunt like an animal. Protista just loves to blur the line. All right, so let's move on from the misfits to a kingdom we are all very familiar with, whether we know it or not. Let's talk about kingdom fungi.
So we're talking about yeasts, molds, and of course, mushrooms. Now, fungi are heterotrophs, like animals, meaning they have to get food from others. But unlike animals, they don't eat it, they absorb it. And what really sets them apart is that their cell walls are made of a tough substance called chitin. The same stuff that makes up an insect's exoskeleton, not the cellulose you find in plants. They're nature's great decomposers, and they're also masters of teamwork, forming incredible partnerships like lichens, which is a team-up between a fungus and an alga.
Next up is the kingdom that really forms the foundation for so much of life on land. I'm talking about the vast and absolutely vital kingdom plantae.
From the tiniest mosses to the giant redwood trees, all plants are multicellular eukaryotes. Their cells have these rigid walls made of cellulose, which gives them structure. But their defining feature, their superpower, is that they are autotrophs. They are life's producers. They use photosynthesis to turn sunlight into energy, creating the food that fuels nearly every ecosystem on this planet.
And finally, we arrive at the kingdom that includes us. Welcome to Kingdom Animalia.
So, we are also multicellular eukaryotes, but with one massive difference from plants. Our cells have absolutely no cell walls, and that's huge. That lack of a rigid wall is what allows for the flexibility and movement that defines our kingdom. We're heterotrophs. We have to eat other organisms for energy. And from insects to fish to us, nearly all animals can move, and we've developed incredibly complex tissues and organ systems to get around in the world.
Okay, so we have our 5 kingdoms. Our library of life is all neatly organized, right? Well, not quite. What about the things that don't seem to belong in the library at all? There are these strange outliers that defy all of our classification rules.
Whitaker's system has no place for these acellular or non-cellular agents, and that's because they're not even made of cells. A virus is just a bit of genetic material, DNA or RNA, wrapped up in a protein coat. A viroid is even simpler. It's just a piece of RNA. That's it. And prions are the strangest of all. They're infectious, misfolded proteins that have no genetic material whatsoever.
Take a look at this. It's a bacteriophage, a virus that infects bacteria. It almost looks like a little lunar lander, doesn't it? Its entire structure is built for one single purpose: to protect its genetic material inside that protein shell, called a capsid, and then inject it into a host cell. Outside of a cell, a virus is totally inert. It's basically a crystal. It does nothing. And that leads us to the final fascinating question. A virus can't reproduce by itself. It has no cells. It's basically dead in the water outside of a host. But the second it gets inside, it hijacks the cell's machinery and starts making copies of itself. So this raises the ultimate question: are viruses living or non-living? The truth is, science doesn't really have a simple answer. And that just goes to show you that even with our best systems, life always finds a way to be messy, to defy our neat little boxes. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.